Hi everybody, Creative Katie, Karen Burchill here. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to easily create interesting layers in your art journaling mixed media pieces. So here's what we're going to use. We're going to use Inktense Blocks along with our acrylic paints, a napkin, a couple stencils, a good basic script stamp, and some music paper, collage paper. So here's the napkin. It's called Classic Helleborus, and I got this from NINNYSNAPKINS.com. There is a link and a new 2024 coupon code in the description box. So there are 4 different ones. They're very similar, but first step, let's cut them apart so that we can manipulate them on the page and set up our scene. So I'm going to give you some options here. You can do this on a 6x6 card. You can fold over different portions of it, put a sentiment, add it. This would also work well on an 8x8 wood panel or canvas. You have lots of room on the top and on the right-hand side to put some texture and build an interesting background, put a sentiment. A third option, you can use the 8x8 inverted wood panel and have a self-framing, self-standing option. But here's what I used. I used a 9x12 art journal page from my Canson Mixed Media. And because I'm working on a larger surface, I can use 2 of these beautiful focal images from the napkin. Quite often I only use 1 and I go smaller. So this is giving me something different to do, but there's still good areas where I can build pattern and texture. So preparing the napkin, you need to pull off the 2 excess plies. And now what I want to do is I'm going to water cut around the focal image. And to use that, you can see me doing it, I'm using a fine liner brush with very little water. And you want little water because otherwise it gets too wet. You'll see that happen a little bit later. Now I want to water cut this because, well, it's too hard to cut a napkin exactly. This gives a deckled edge which disappears more seamlessly. So it doesn't look like you've just glued down the napkin. So I just work my way around here. Now I'm taking off the easy parts. I can go in and get those middle parts later, and often I do that. But because this napkin is white, those center ones, I'm going to leave that because it's really not going to interfere with what will happen. But if it was a colored napkin, that's a little more important to cut off all the excess. So I'm just, now here it got too wet, right? You can see that. If I rip that right now, I might take some of that hellebore off. So I'm just stopping, drying it, take it back to ground zero, and then re-water cut it. Just take that little extra time if you end up with too much water. But the secret is very fine liner brush here, and just do little sections as a time as you work your way out. And as long as you remove most of the excess, you should be okay. I'm going to leave that centerpiece. You can cut it out, like I said, but if you do that, it becomes more fragile and a little harder to manipulate. So again, do what works comfortably for you. If you're just learning, you may want to leave those in. If you are experienced at it, you may want to cut them out. So then I wanted some interesting background. So I am using some music paper. This I got from the thrift store, cheap and inexpensive. I don't need a stamp. If I had a music stamp, I could stamp it on tissue paper and then glue that in. Here I'm getting the benefit of the colorized pages, but I also want some of that music to peek through at the end. So I've just kind of layered it up where the focal image was going. Now this is also adding texture to the page because it's not a flat page anymore. So in this one layer, I've added texture and pattern. So once this is dry, and I dry between each layers, I'm positioning back the focal image to see where I'm going to add more texture. And I'm going to do it in the top left-hand corner and in the bottom right-hand corner. This stencil, one of my favorites, and if you are looking for a good basic, linked tiles from the Crafter's Workshop might be for you. I have used this so much. So to add the texture, I can use thick gesso or modeling paste. The modeling paste would be a little bit thicker, but you can use thick gesso. I'm just giving you options. I want you to use what you have as opposed to going out and buying one specialty project for every project that you see or like. So I'm positioning that. I don't want it necessarily underneath where I'm going to be gluing the napkin focal. And I'm just applying it with a palette knife. I don't want this exact. I want it kind of incomplete. Going for a bit of a rustic vintage look. And there we have it. You can still see the music paper peeking through, but now we've also added a layer of texture. So right now we've got 2 layers. Pattern, color, texture are the layers that you will add. And if you play with those elements and say, okay, how can I add texture? How can I add color? How can that will lead the way. So of course, once the thick gesso is on there or the modeling paste, I am drying this. I do not show drying time on here. So before I put this on, I did dry it. So I'm putting that on. So now you can see how this is coming together. All the elements are working together. Each layer adding something to it. Now, where the napkin goes where the music paper is, I don't want it as dark. I don't want those musical notes necessarily to show through on the hellebore. So I'm just taking some watered down white gesso and putting it where that napkin is going to be glued down, just to knock back, dull the pattern that's there. And once I'm happy with that, I'm going to glue down the 3rd layer, which is my focal image. And I put fluid matte medium underneath and on top. Mindful of the fact that the napkin, once it's wet, becomes fragile. So it looks like I'm going very rough because the video is somewhat sped up. But you want to use a softer brush and be careful not to tear the napkin. So I do part of it, fold it down, and then I do the other half of the focal image. This one is a fairly big focal image. And I want to seal that napkin with a coat of fluid matte medium on top because I'm going to colorize it and shade, and that works best. So as much as I'm liking the background with a lot of white there, and I thought about leaving it, now I'm going to colorize it. And this is another layer. This is the color layer. And to achieve this, I am using one of my favorite colors, Naples yellow and white gesso. So some areas are going to be darker Naples yellow, some will be lighter Naples yellow, and some are going to be almost white. And that builds a lot of interest into this layer. I start with the brush, then I go with the makeup sponge, then you'll see me using my fingers, I'm sure. Now I want to be careful. I don't want to lose those music notes. So often I do. I put too much color on, so I'm kind of thinning down the paint because the Naples yellow and the gesso is a little bit opaque. So And I want to make sure I see some of that music notes peeking out. I don't want to obliterate all of it. So I'm playing around here, doing a little bit of a dance. Some areas are darker yellow, some are going to be more white. And I'm going in between where the napkin was and getting that all over yellow color. You could have gone with ivory if you don't like the Naples yellow. But if you're looking for a color that works really well on a multitude of projects, Naples yellow might be it. So here I'm just trying to add a little bit more white gesso to add a little more lighter spots, building variation. I'm not sure if we can call this another layer, but there's several layers of color. And the more variation you build in, the more interest you're building in. If it was all flat one tone, can be a little bit boring. So when we get to the final product, people can look. If there's lots of interest in there, they're going, oh, I can see a little bit of that music. Oh, I can see a little bit of that modeling paste texture. Oh, it's white over here. Oh, it's more yellow. How did they do that? Keep them guessing by adding variations in. Sometimes it's the contrast between the lighter and the darker areas that make it more interesting. So I'm doing the little bit of dance. I'm adding some of the Naples yellow straight up. I'm adding some white gesso. I go back and forth till I'm happy with the base color. Now I want to add a little more, one more layer, and I'm using another really good basic stencil. This one's called Screen View, again from the Crafters Workshop. You can get Crafters Workshop stencils at Ninny's Napkins. As I said, there's a link in the description box, or there is also a link to the Crafters Workshop Shopify store where you can get all the stencils there. This one, I'm loving the addition of this smaller scale. This is a 6x6 stencil, how it's working. It just adds so much interest to that background. Here I'm not using Naples yellow, I'm using yellow oxide, or I believe it's yellow ochre. Depending on the brand, it could be called either. It's just a shade darker than the Naples yellow. I am absolutely loving how this is working, and I'm still playing. I'm adding little bits here and there. I tend to do a little too much. I think I need to edit myself, stop a little bit sooner, but I just get in the throes of creating and I'm just having fun. So now I am going to colorize the napkin focal, and I'm going to use gesso and my Inktense blocks. So what I'm going to basically do, it's kind of a combination of using both of those products, put a coat of gesso and then put some of the Inktense blocks. So either I make a pool of color on my glass, or I just rub and get the color right on the brush, right off the block. Now Inktense blocks work like watercolor, but they are ink and they are permanent. And again, it is next to the acrylic paint, they are my most used color medium in mixed media art journaling, because they are permanent when they are dry and I don't have to worry about them reactivating at any level. One less thing to remember, and yet I still get that watercolor look. So here I'm just going back and forth between adding gesso, adding Inktense block color. I could do the same thing by adding acrylic paint color. I just find that the Inktense block, you get that watercolory look a little easier, and it's a little more translucent. So again, you're going to see me going here. In a minute I'll speed up the video because I keep repeating myself, just adding gesso and then Inktense block color. I find patting it with my fingers sometimes makes it more a softer edge and you don't have such an edge there. So the ones on the bottom I've done, and the ones on the top I have yet to do. Now here a lot of that music note came through, but I'm going to put some gesso and that's going to knock that back and get rid of that. And then I'm going to add color. And since no one's going to be able to take the napkin and compare it exactly to what you've done, this works. So if you were doing the 6x6 card or the 8x8 panel, you could follow all the same steps, adjust for the size of your substrate, and do the same thing. You could do a different color background. What would it look like if it was a off-white background or ivory background? And while the stencils that I've used here are good basic ones that would make a great addition to your stash, look at what you have and find something similar. So now I'm going to do the same thing with the leaves of the focal image. I'm going to put gesso on, and then while it's still wet, I'm going to come in and add green color that I've matched as close as possible. And often that means I've taken color off of 2 or 3 blocks, not necessarily just one. And then I do on the leaves also do a wash of the Naples yellow. I like adding that to the green. It just adds something. I don't know. So again, here I'm just putting gesso on in the middle part and then coming in and colorizing it with the Inktense blocks and some of that Naples yellow acrylic paint. And since we're not going for realism necessarily, I'm working quickly and I'm not worried too much about being so precise. After giving that a dry, I'm painting the stamens, is that what they're called, in the middle of the hellebores with that Naples yellow. It was a different yellow than what I use in the background, and there was a bit of a conflict in the color, so here I'm just making it my own. Overpainting. When you overpaint, it also adds texture to it and makes it look as if you've painted the whole thing as opposed to gluing down just a napkin. And then you can tweak the colors. I will also add the color because I want the focal image to be most forward. So now, because I want the focal image to be more forward, I am going to shade around my focal image. And I'm using a combination of quinacridone magenta, that's what you see me doing here, and then a little bit of black, or a mixture of the two. I don't want to go straight on black. I think that's going to be too harsh on this very soft, muted, pastel kind of page. But I did want this to stand out. So I'm just working carefully, and this is where you want to make sure you've sealed the top of the napkin with the fluid matte medium or clear gesso, something that's going to turn it into a non-porous surface. Otherwise it's going to wick into the napkin and you're not going to get an effect that you like. In fact, it's going to basically wreck your focal image. So always seal it and turn it into a non-porous surface before you do the shading. And you can see the difference on the top and the bottom, the difference the shading makes. I'm using an angle brush for this and just working my way around. While I'm doing this, I'm looking at that background, and while I love all the elements, you've got the texture from the music paper, the pattern from the music paper, the texture from the thick gesso through the stencil and that pattern, and then the stenciling of the screen view, something's missing in that background and I'm trying to figure that out. So I put off doing something on that until I know what I want to do. Because sometimes it comes to me, I come up with a solution. So there I'm putting the quinacridone magenta shading, and then I'm following up with a little bit of the black. And then I'm going to shade on the leaves as well. I decide that I want to introduce that pinky violet color to the background. So I made myself a pool of Inktense color, and I'm just rubbing it in here and there in the background. And I'm very intuitively doing this. I really don't have a plan. I just knew that I wanted to introduce that color. I wanted to bring out the texture. And it was like, okay, we'll just keep going till I get this to the point where I like it. So yeah, one more layer. Another color layer. I don't know how many we're up to. I think there's 8 layers in this. Can you count them? I'm not done. There's still going to be more layers. So I keep adding. Here I'm adding more the softer pink color, and then I come in with more of a violet purple color, and you're going to see me adding that. The Inktense block, while it's dry, when it's permanent, you can take a baby wipe at this stage and wipe it back if you get somewhere that you don't like it. Now I'm adding more of that purple in there, and that's giving a little more contrast too. Different tones each add. So here I'm adding this in, this darker one right here, and suddenly it got caught in the nooks and the crannies of the modeling paste / thick gesso, and it's bringing out that texture a little bit more, and I'm loving that look. Now if you liked it when it was the Naples yellow and that's where you wanted to stop with layers, go for it. Right? It's all just, there is no right or wrong. There's what you like. But this background has so many layers and so much interest in it. So now I take the violet color Inktense block and I'm going around the edge and then activating it to edge my page. This is a color that I put into the background. And I just want to edge and frame my page here. I think I'm done with the Inktense blocks. I wanted to add a little more contrast there, so I am shading with black acrylic paint and my angle brush. And this just, often when I shade, I do the two-tone, I do the darkest color, and then black as well. And that just, that's where it makes me happy. It's just kind of tied it all in. And now I'm ready to put the sentiment. And the sentiment that I chose, which is, I started, and that was the first thing that I wanted. It says, be where your feet are. Enjoy where you are. Find joy where you are. Be present. So many times we are in places and we're not thoroughly there. We're on our devices. We're not enjoying it. So be where you are. Enjoy where you are. Be where your feet are. I heard this saying several months ago, and I said I have to put that on an art journal page. And actually, this isn't just an art journal page. This is actually a cover for one of my art journals. I have almost enough to recoil it, and this is the cover. So really no difference between doing a cover and doing an art journal page. The only difference is on this, I will give this a coat of Minwax polyacrylic varnish because it is going to be a cover. Decide it needs one more layer, so I'm using white acrylic paint on my script stamp here and stamping with white. That's just brightening it, and I'm going over top of some of the focal image as well. And this just kind of ties everything together. Now I have several script stamps of varying sizes, because sometimes you want finer, sometimes you want a little bit bolder or bigger. So having variation, again, a good basic staple. So if you are someone who's just starting to build your stash, everything that I'm using here are good basic stash builders that I can highly recommend, that I know I get a lot of use of, and I recommend that you will get a lot of use of them. Because no matter what the subject matter is, you'll be able to use these. They're not specific to one specific subject, like just for flowers or just for dragonflies or just ocean themed. That's all dry, so now I'm just gluing down my sentiment. Now I bubble cut around that, which leaves just that little bit of white, which ties into the white in the background, and the dark, bold black font ties in with the edging that's in black and the edging that's on those hellebores. So everything that I have there has more purpose. Now I'm using my General's charcoal pencil here, and I'm just making some sketchy lines around the hellebores. I will have to spray this with a fixative before I put the Minwax polyacrylic varnish on it, because this General's charcoal will smudge as soon as I wet it. So either be prepared to spray this with a fixative, or don't varnish, don't put any wet medium after you use your General's charcoal or Stabilo all pencil or those things. So you can use a whole variety of things. You just need to be mindful of what their properties are and make adjustments to what comes next. Either sealing the paper or not varnishing it. So if this was just an art journal page, I wouldn't have to worry about reactivating it. And here, one more layer, we are going to splatter with gold because I love my bling. So I challenge you. Pick a focal image, couple stencils, couple stamps, some collage paper, make an interesting multi-layered mixed media art journal page. But be where your feet are. Enjoy where you are. Take it all in. I've got close-ups of the final project at the end. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up. Here we have it. Lighting isn't the best, but look at that shimmer shine. Look at that texture coming out. Every single thing that we've added can be seen. All those layers. There's so much interest in here. Now it's your turn. Go get creative.